Your Excellencies, Lieutenant General Borouias, thank you for inviting me. I had the privilege to speak at the fourth Air Power Conference in 2016, and I'm absolutely delighted to be back. The first responsibility of any government is to ensure its state's sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity. To that end, we have armed forces, professional men and women who are educated, trained, and equipped to preserve peace and to protect their citizens. We need to study air power carefully because it is an essential part of our political military toolbox. More precisely, air power is now the preferred military option for your national leaders because it offers the prospect of military victory without large-scale destruction and loss of life. Air power is the state's first responder for deterrence and defense because of its readiness, its swiftness, and its responsiveness. It is the state's first line of national defense. As was said in the introduction, if you lose control of the air, you lose on the ground, you lose at sea, and you lose quickly. War at home is no longer unthinkable. The Euro-Atlantic area is not at peace. It is therefore imperative that our political leaders and military colleagues from other services appreciate the importance of being an aerospace-minded nation. It is imperative that our political masters realize the importance of investing in a first-class Air Force because second class doesn't cut it. Consequently, when we talk about air power, we should do it responsibly, with deep insight and broad knowledge. We should talk about air power's role in security and defense policy with authority, and we need to elaborate on the strengths, limitations, and potential of air power honestly, without fear or favor. And this brings me to my message today. The future relevance of air power depends on a professional and comprehensive understanding of the air power profession itself, this unique air power profession. And understanding the air power profession is the baseline for appreciating air power's challenges and opportunities, the theme of the conference. Having established the why, my presentation today is about the how we need to go about to get a complete and proper understanding of the aerospace option. I will do so through this model that includes 24 themes categorized into 4 parts. While each theme is important, it is the totality that makes the difference. So let me dissect this model starting with part 1, and we work ourselves through it clockwise. We start with the anatomy, the very nature of air power, and that is its key features. By capitalizing on tempo of operations and precision of attack, air power can produce instant effects and psychological effects from the opening moment. And this is quite different from what's happening on the battlefield, which is sequential and cumulative in nature. In one sentence, the distinctive characteristics of air power are speed, range, flexibility, precision, and lethality. And these have improved with every new generation of aircraft and weapon systems. Next, the student of air power must appreciate the art of high command and leadership, which has 3 components. It's the physical, of course, but it's also the intellectual and the morale. The biggest challenge for great air leaders today is the contest of ideas, because the contest shapes war-winning strategies, concepts, and force structures. We also need to understand air power theory and strategy. We must overcome the entrenched land-centric military thinking that dominates European states. While familiarity with the ideas of Dewey and John Slessor and Billy Mitchell are important, the modern-day theories of John Boyd, John Warden, and not least Dave Deptula, our next speaker, are more important still because the concepts of strategic deprivation and systemic paralysis and parallel warfare and effects-based operations take current technology and the changing character of war into account. Military professionals must also dedicate focused study to the impact of science and technology. Air power is a high-tech profession. The advent of stealthy drones with greater payload and sophistication and weapon dispensing capability indicates that the drone revolution is genuine and is part of warfare for years to come. And we must understand this. We must understand the impact of the fourth industrial revolution and its automated systems and artificial intelligence. Military studies often underestimate the importance of international law and ethics. Although no specific treaties govern the use of air power, a significant body of rules based on general humanitarian law puts constraints and restraints on the use of air power in armed conflicts, and we need to be aware of this. We must understand the four key principles of distinction, military necessity, proportionality, and humanity. And while all these disciplines are important, air professionals must know their history. We must know our past. We must review the evolution of air power and its impact from the First World War to the present to compare and contrast lessons from different campaigns over the last 100 years. The military mind must identify what succeeded and failed in the past under different circumstances and translate those expectations into propositions, principles, and best practices. With that broad background in place, the student of air power must have a solid grasp of the profession's roles and functions, that is, how to deliver air power. The value of air power is in its application, or what the British say, the proof is in the pudding. It begins by understanding the four enduring roles of air power. The first enduring role is control of the air, to secure freedom of action in the air, land, and maritime domains without effective interference from adversary air power. It provides freedom from attack and freedom to attack and freedom to maneuver. The rule over all rules is control of the air. The second role is strike, the ability to attack with the intention of damaging or destroying a target. Strike can take many forms, from strategic attack to interdiction and close air support, and it's very powerful when applied as part of parallel warfare, in which several aircraft can strike targets simultaneously across an entire theater of operations. Third is intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, what we call ISR, to inform tactical, operational, and strategic understanding. At the most basic level, this involves getting the right information to the right people in the right format at the right time. One of the main advances of the next generation aircraft is their netted capability to gather accurate data and disseminate it immediately. Any war begins and ends with intelligence. If you haven't seen the movie Eye in the Sky with Helen Mirren, you should. It demonstrates that even perfect intelligence can raise legal and ethical issues when it comes to the Shakespearean decision of to bomb or not to bomb. I'm referring to a situation at the operational headquarters which has perfect knowledge of terrorists being in a specific building due to small drones, and one can strike and kill them at will. But suddenly, a child comes running to get some bread in front of the building, and that is the dilemma. Do we make a strike to get rid of the bad guys who we have been hunting for many, many months, at the expense of killing one innocent child. We must never forget that war is about human lives. Just because you can hit something doesn't mean you should. The fourth enduring role is air mobility, to move personnel, equipment, or forces using airborne platforms to maneuver and to sustain operations. The 100-year history of air power validates that airlift as a means of crisis response for both humanitarian relief and military presence is of essence. But these roles, these four enduring roles, cannot be properly understood without connecting them to broader studies of command and control, the crucial enabler to lead an air campaign, that is to direct assigned forces by following the principles of centralized command and adaptive execution. And finally, and equally important, although often undervalued and underestimated, logistics applies the principles and philosophies to support movement and maintenance of forces. Logistics is a fundamental component of military capability and a critical enabler of air power. We have to think about logistics from the beginning and not as an afterthought. And all this is quintessentially the bread and butter for mastering our profession. Moving to the third part, the student of air power needs to comprehend the cross-domain environment to develop an understanding of how to apply air power as opposed to how to deliver it. The coordination and integration of air power into joint, multinational, and interagency environments. Joint operations seek to exploit synergies among the land, the maritime, air, special operation forces, cyber, and space domains. And the air professional must study air-land integration and air-maritime integration, the latter including aircraft carrier power projection. Separate studies must be dedicated to special forces, mainly because this involves activities that are very different from integration of air power into large formations. Special forces are agile and less numerous. Making cooperation with air power is very different from that of coordinating with large army forces. Supplementing exploration of the traditional environment-oriented branches, separate studies must address space operations. Space-based services provide vital enabling capabilities for all of the operating domains. However you organize your space as a separate force under the joint part, under the Air Force, any student of military operations need to grasp the importance and utility of space as a separate operational domain. And furthermore, air-cyber integration involves the application of cyber capabilities to create joint warfighting effects in both the physical and virtual battle space. It can involve cyber operations in support of air operations or the other way around, both defensive and offensive. And we have seen how cyber attacks can paralyze societies for a considerable time, and the repair costs are quite high. Cyber is a wild card in future wars because it's so difficult to predict its impact and effects, and its true potential has yet to unfold. And air professionals must also understand the relationship between air power and interagency actors, such as the Red Cross or a range of civilian non-governmental organizations. Such integration is important during a campaign, but it's even more important in the transition into the post-war phase, focused on establishing a legitimate regime along the principles of good governance. When a war begins, the only certainty is that the war will end at some point. And this is important for winning the peace rather than just winning the war itself. Having dealt with the operational aspects of air power, the final aspect that merits careful attention is the wider strategic context. Looking into this last circle, part 4, We must understand the interaction between air power and politics. Military action is successful only if it helps achieve the political goals of our national leaders. It is precisely because of air power's strength and its application requires political prudence and political restraint. Extending that argument, air professionals must understand international relations and game theory, especially the art of coercion, deterrence and compellence, in the words of Thomas Schelling. This includes an understanding of nuclear weapons, escalation strategies, and arms control. Let's not pretend that nuclear weapons do not exist. It's also important to become familiar with experiences from recent multinational operations, the art of working in a coalition. Working with allies and partners have both advantages and challenges, and understanding our different political systems, our nation's national sensitivities, cultural pride, and doctrinal preferences is just as important as the technological interoperability. And it is no less important to understand the fourth estate, the media, the press. The instant reporting puts extra pressure on those involved in air power. Air power produces highly visible results that are on the internet or YouTube seconds after they happen. And the physical drama and the psychological trauma always lend themselves to negative and graphic depictions. We must do better to win the narrative. The truth should not be the first casualty of war. And air professionals must be able to justify the cost of combat air power. Building first-rate forces is undeniably very expensive, and consider the cost of an F-35. The cost of military equipment must be measured not by unit cost, but by the effect an asset has on the opponent. Viewed in this way, even a costly weapon can be relatively inexpensive. This insight also applies to the relationship between industry and air power. There is a strong linkage between politics, air power, and aerospace industry. It is the holy trinity of being an aerospace nation. On a national level, partnerships for building aircraft strengthens international cooperation and operational interoperability. Colleagues, this model is in many ways a guide for how to study air power. It is intended to improve our knowledge of aerospace power by covering a range of interdependent themes. Sometimes we have to take a step back and look at the big picture. The objective is to develop an appreciation of the whole story, because only through that kind of interdisciplinary reading and thinking will true understanding of air power emerge. This is the roadmap to air-mindedness. This is a model for how to identify opportunities and challenges. Finally, let me offer 4 points for how to succeed in becoming an aerospace nation. First, we need to engage in air power advocacy, and quite honestly, we have to stop apologizing for what air power can do. Make yourselves heard. You do so from a place of knowledge, and you advise responsibly and honestly with authority. Second, we need to develop new ideas, new concepts with emphasis on how air power contributes to creating strategic effects. Young officers must be encouraged to think. And third, we need to connect air power strategy to national policy. And in that process, move beyond tactics, the battlefield, and the land-centric orientation that has occupied us for generations. And finally, we need to add imagination and creative thinking to science and technology. Air power is just as much operational art as it is operational science. And you have to have the moral courage to come up with new ideas, to think creatively, and at times you have to think outside the box. Ladies and gentlemen, That concludes my prepared remarks. Thank you for listening to me.